If there is one thing that is certain in this world, it is that you will die. Eventually. As such, it is an understandable fear that most once-living individuals have thought about. Macabre art often depicts death or dying in an emotionally intense or grotesque way. Visceral depictions of violence and suffering also fall into this definition of theatrical morbidity. In this video essay, I will discuss the potential origins for this apparent macabre obsession. Following the Baroque designs commissioned by the Order of St. John, dramatically contrasted themes emerged in paintings anticipating later macabre art. The light and sunny weather in Malta was contrasted by the eaves of the roof, creating shadows and volumizing the space. These style choices would go on to influence contrast in later paintings. In a Catholic society, death and purgatory are painful passageways into heaven, making people committed to praying for those souls in purgatory. Most images of purgatory sought to contrast the pain of purgatory and the light of heaven, a spiritual light at the end of the tunnel, anticipating later macabre art. The Spanish Catholic influence on Malta's visual culture emphasized dramatic atmosphere and iconography through a visual exchange of cultural ideals. The Spanish Golden Age of art featured themes of memento mori, reminding the churchgoer of their eventual death and prompting them to fear the time of judgment. The public would have identified these symbols and reflected on their own eventual death. This sentiment becomes very popular in tombs in St. John's Cathedral. In the entrance to the Annex, one tomb features a skeleton holding the words, "You who tread on me will be trodden upon," which is very dramatic and speaks for itself. The iconography in this and other tombs represent fleeting time and a rapture of souls. Macabre iconography often featured the last trumpet as reference to the raising of the dead on Judgment Day. Other ominous messages from the tombs of St. John echo these similar sentiments. The general public would identify and associate this iconography with meanings, stories they learned in Mass, especially since they were massively illiterate. Italian and especially Sicilian art influenced Maltese visual culture by featuring excessively gory and evocative images. Dramatic and excessive gore were details favored by Sicilian and Maltese Catholics. In opposition to such violent realism was the Council of Trent, which ended by imposing sanctions on religious artworks to keep within decorum, which is very vague. The vaguest thing you could ever define. This impacted artwork in much of Italy, but strangely, artwork in Sicily and Malta continued to hold gore and violence, seemingly safer from the distance between northern Italy and the south. Therefore, artists who faced persecution tended to flee towards those areas to create artwork. Caravaggio's work for Catholic officials sometimes exemplified the balance between decorum and emotion. However, even Caravaggio faced pressure to tone down the gore and drama, which secured his infamy in later years, as we know him today. Other paintings were continuously rejected or looked down upon, deemed problematic for one reason or another. To our modern eye, we may not understand why these images were deemed problematic, but they had a reason. It's not a very good reason, but it is a reason. Malta's taste for dramatic contrasts continued to lead to popularity and the violent works of Frate Vincenzo and Caravaggesque artists like Fra Mattia Feti. Maltese and Sicilian culture was shaped by the events of the Black Plague, leaving surviving citizens personally accustomed to death. People often turned to spiritual remedies in the forms of offerings, processions, ironically, and paintings for the public to pray upon. Plague paintings often feature Mary intervening for the suffering. Here again, we can see a visual contrast between heaven and suffering. Where have we ever seen this before? Since Saint Sebastian survived his first execution by arrows, Catholics saw the plague as an arrow, something that could be saved, which is why we see God holding an arrow. He is causing the plague, and this is the only explanation we have for this in the 17th century. Despite many believing that God was the cause of the plague, intense repentance and prayer were thought to have been the way to save yourself. Suor Maria de Domenici's painting shows Mary with Saint Roch and Nicholas. Images of Saint Roch are very common all over Sicily and Malta, since he was cured of the plague, which many wished for the same fortune. The familiar figure of the dead breastfeeding mother is a horrifyingly macabre symbol, and it shows symptoms indicative of the plague, the bubo, which is very uncommon in this time for its obscene indecorum, yet realism. In times of plague, Maltese visual culture, as a result, was increasingly macabre in nature, due to a close familiarity with death. In this video, we've talked about how Baroque contrasted extreme lightness and extreme darkness, anticipating later macabre depictions. Spanish Catholic traditions also seem to lift the essential dread of death by dignifying it, often with iconography that is kind of questionable. Italian artwork also drew upon violent and emotional images, playing up into the Maltese and Sicilian tastes. Amidst the plague, people used morbid images to pray for protection against God's wrath, and honestly, it desensitized them to the imagery of death. Humans all deal with existentialism in different ways. It often finds its way into art since it is a method of personal self-expression. An obsession with death, though, macabre, often comes from a strange place of gratitude. Does it not make one cherish the life and time spent on Earth? So, I'll leave you with a final question. Death. Death. Dun dun dun! Is it not inevitable? Since death is such an unforgiving constant, experienced by everyone, the great equalizer, did any wonder we tend to think about it so much? Does that make us macabre? I hope so. I said this whole video for nothing. So, live your lives. Death is coming. Peace and love.